They didn't just conquer queens. Rome systematically broke them. Imagine the gasp, the shudder as Queen Zenobia, once the formidable monarch who dared challenge an empire, watched her general. But Rome offered something far more insidious than a quick end. It offered a living death. Her punishment, and that of countless others, was meticulously calculated. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, transforming defiant rulers into breathing monuments of imperial might. For women who wore crowns, defeat was not merely about lost battles. It was about facing a brutality designed to annihilate every shred of dignity. Under Roman law, a war captive held no legal protection whatsoever. The principle known as jus agentium, the law of nations, declared that military defeat instantly transformed free people into mere property. Once a city fell, once an army surrendered, its inhabitants became legally enslaved. Their former status, their royal blood, meant nothing. A queen commanded no more legal standing than the lowest soldier in her defeated ranks. This legal framework created a terrifying reality, starkly different from Roman citizens' rights. To flog a Roman citizen was considered a scandal, to execute one without trial an outrage. But foreign captives, no matter their royal lineage, possessed no such safeguards. They could be none for nobility. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code from the 5th century before the Common Era, established these chilling principles with brutal clarity. Prisoners taken in war became the property of the Roman state or were distributed among soldiers. Women of royal lineage quickly discovered that their former power meant absolutely nothing once chains replaced their crowns. The historian Tacitus documented this legal reality, detailing the treatment of defeated British royalty. Roman officials, he noted, showed no hesitation in violating those who had once commanded armies and administered justice. Female captives faced an additional horrifying vulnerability. Roman military culture, honed through centuries of relentless conquest, regarded captured women as mere spoils of war. While some elite prisoners might be housed in relative comfort, awaiting ransom or political negotiation, most faced immediate crushing degradation. The line between prisoner of war and slave existed only on paper. In practice, defeat dissolved all former status, leaving captive queens vulnerable to treatment unthinkable for anyone possessing Roman citizenship. Then came the spectacle, the Roman triumph. It transformed military victory into a public festival, and captive royalty served as the chilling centerpiece of these elaborate processions. When a general received permission from the Senate to celebrate a triumph, preparations began for a display that would parade Rome's dominance through the streets for all to witness. The route stretched for nearly 4 kilometers from the Field of Mars through the Forum and up to the Capitoline Hill, a winding path through crowded thoroughfares. These processions followed a meticulously choreographed order designed to maximize psychological impact. Musicians and entertainers led the parade, their joyful sounds jarring against the solemn march of what was to come. Then carts bearing paintings and models of conquered cities, of distant subdued lands. Wild animals from exotic territories were led in chains, offering Romans a glimpse of the unknown world their legions had brought to heel. And then the prisoners of war, walking in shackles at the heart of the spectacle. Captured rulers marched at the very front of this column of the defeated. Their royal garments often remained intact, not out of respect, but to emphasize the sheer magnitude of their fall. Queens who had commanded armies now shuffled in chains before jeering crowds who celebrated their humiliation. The contrast was deliberate. By displaying monarchs in their full regalia, yet bound and utterly powerless, Rome communicated a message that resonated far beyond the city walls. No kingdom stood beyond reach, no throne guaranteed safety. The triumphal procession served multiple purposes beyond mere celebration. It demonstrated Roman military might to potential allies and enemies alike. It satisfied the bloodlust of citizens who craved visible proof of victory, and it provided a stage for the systematic degradation of those who had dared to resist Roman expansion. For female captives of royal blood, the triumph meant enduring the unblinking gaze of thousands, stripped bare of all dignity. The journey typically took an entire day, the procession moving slowly, painstakingly, to allow spectators along the route to observe every detail. Captive queens walked this gauntlet, knowing their fate hung in the balance. Some would survive the day, others would not see sunset. The uncertainty itself served as torture, forcing the defeated to contemplate their approaching doom with every agonizing step through streets lined with celebrating Romans. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had carved out an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia, challenging Roman authority across the entire East. When Emperor Aurelian finally crushed her forces in 272 Common Era and captured the queen as she fled toward Persia, he acquired more than a military victory. He acquired the perfect symbol for his upcoming triumph. The Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies from the 4th century before the Common Era, established these chilling principles with brutal clarity. Prisoners taken in war became the property of the Roman state or were distributed among soldiers. Women of royal lineage quickly discovered that their former power meant absolutely nothing once chains replaced their crowns. The historian Tacitus documented this legal reality, detailing the treatment of defeated British royalty. Roman officials, he noted, showed no hesitation in violating those who had once commanded armies and administered justice. Female captives faced an additional horrifying vulnerability. Roman military culture, honed through centuries of relentless conquest, regarded captured women as mere spoils of war. While some elite prisoners might be housed in relative comfort, awaiting ransom or political negotiation, most faced immediate, crushing degradation. The line between prisoner of war and slave existed only on paper. In practice, defeat dissolved all former status, leaving captive queens vulnerable to treatment unthinkable for anyone possessing Roman citizenship.
Deliberate cruelty. Zenobia was adorned with jewels that caught the sunlight, transforming her into a glittering, tragic monument to Rome's power over the wealthiest kingdoms of the East. But it was the chains that drew the most attention. These were not simple iron shackles meant merely to restrain. Zenobia walked bound in heavy golden chains, so massive that guards marched beside her to help bear their immense weight. The choice of gold was deliberate. These chains symbolized the very wealth she had commanded, now twisted into the instrument of her bondage. Her entire person had become a walking display of conquered riches. Ancient sources note that Zenobia maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal. Despite the weight of the golden chains, despite the hours of slow marching through hostile crowds, she carried herself with an almost chilling dignity. This very defiance may have saved her life. Aurelian, perhaps impressed by her bearing or calculating that her continued existence served his purposes better than her death, spared Zenobia the execution that awaited most captive rulers. Instead, the emperor granted her a villa near Rome, where she lived out her remaining years. Some accounts claimed she even married a Roman senator, becoming part of aristocratic society, her daughters marrying into noble families. Whether this represented true mercy or a more subtle, prolonged form of humiliation remains a chilling debate. Zenobia spent her final decades as a living reminder of Rome's power, her presence in Italian society a constant demonstration that even the mightiest queens could be reduced to Roman dependence. The Roman machine didn't just break the powerful, it shattered the innocent. In 60 Common Era, King Prasutagus of the Iceni, with a dying breath, tried to safeguard his kingdom and his family. He willed half his territory to Emperor Nero, the other half to his 2 young daughters, a compromise he hoped that would preserve Iceni independence while satisfying Roman greed. It failed catastrophically. Roman officials, led by the imperial procurator Decianus Cottus, simply ignored the will. They seized all Iceni lands and property, declaring the entire kingdom forfeit. When Queen Boudica, a warrior in her own right, dared to protest this brazen violation, she faced a punishment that demonstrated how little protection royal status afforded the defeated. Tacitus, whose father-in-law, Agricola, served in Britain during this brutal period, recorded what followed with a rare, unflinching directness for ancient historians discussing such matters. Boudica was publicly subjected to corporal punishment. The flogging alone represented a profound violation. To beat a Roman citizen required legal justification and procedural safeguards. To flog a queen of an allied kingdom was an act of deliberate public humiliation. But the Romans went further. Boudica's daughters, likely teenagers, certainly unmarried, were violated by Roman soldiers. Tacitus describes these assaults with sparse, chilling language that conveys his own horror at events that violated even Roman sensibilities about acceptable conduct. He notes that Boudica was flogged and her daughters violated, placing these crimes at the very heart of his explanation for the catastrophic rebellion that followed. This abuse was not random violence, it was calculated degradation designed to break the royal family and send an undeniable message of Roman dominance over the Iceni people. The public nature of these crimes multiplied their impact exponentially. This was not violence committed in secret in the dark corners of a prison. This was humiliation performed before the very eyes of the Iceni. By abusing the royal family in front of their subjects, Roman officials sent a message of terror about the fate awaiting anyone who dared to question imperial authority. The physical abuse and violation of Boudica and her daughters were meant to terrorize an entire population into submission. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Rather than crushing resistance, the abuse of the royal family ignited a furious rebellion that nearly drove Rome from Britain entirely. Boudica raised an army that destroyed 3 major Roman cities, including Londinium, massacring tens of thousands of Roman citizens and their allies. This ancient structure, built into the northeastern slope of the Capitoline, served as the final stop for Rome's most notable enemies. While the triumph continued up to the Temple of Jupiter, where the victorious general would make lavish offerings, the condemned prisoners were led aside, their fate sealed. The Tullianum consisted of 2 levels. The upper chamber served as a holding cell, a temporary cage. But the lower dungeon, accessible only through a treacherous hole in the ceiling, became the execution chamber. Here, in darkness and filth, Rome's greatest enemies met their end. The method varied. Some were executed by suffocation, others were left to starve. The process remained deliberately hidden from public view, occurring while joyous crowds celebrated in the sun-drenched streets above. Vercingetorix, the legendary Gallic chieftain who had unified the tribes of Gaul against Julius Caesar, exemplified this grim fate. After his defeat at Alesia in 52 before Common Era, Caesar held him in prison for 6 long years before finally parading him through Rome in the triumph of 46 before Common Era. The Gallic leader, once vigorous and commanding, had deteriorated during his prolonged captivity until he appeared as a broken figure before the Roman crowds. After the procession, he was led to the Tullianum and executed. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, met a similarly brutal end following Marius's triumph in 104 before Common Era. According to ancient accounts, when he was lowered into the lower chamber of the Tullianum, the king went mad with the sheer terror. He was left to starve to death over 6 agonizing days, his cries echoing through the cold stone walls, while Rome celebrated above. The historian Plutarch recorded his final words, purportedly uttered in delirium, "How cold this Roman bath is." Simon Bar Giora, a fierce leader of the Jewish revolt that ended with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 Common Era, was also displayed in Titus's triumph before being executed at the traditional site in the Forum. Josephus documented how the triumphal procession would pause at the Temple of Jupiter, an expectant silence falling while messengers awaited word that the execution had been carried out. Only after confirmation of the enemy leader's death did the ceremonies conclude. Not every captive ruler faced immediate execution. It is true the decision rested with the triumphant general and increasingly under the empire with the emperor himself. Some prisoners proved more valuable alive, serving as permanent symbols of Roman victory or as bargaining tools in future negotiations. But for those marked to death, the triumph offered only a temporary, agonizing reprieve before the inevitable descent into the darkness of the Tullianum.
The treatment of captured queens and rulers